Hope everybody's had a great conference. You've learned a lot and have lots of great new connections to take home and seed and spread out. Mike Clear's here with us today from Watchman Technologies, and he'll be speaking about everything you need to know about mining. So please welcome Mike.
Thank you. Thanks, guys, for coming to see me. I realize you've probably had a day or two of a lot of information. That's why I felt the first day of the show on the other side of the event at the Marriott. And if you've had your breakfast and your main course, I just consider this dessert. So just a little bit about me. I work for a company called Watchman Technologies. I put that in when I was asked to speak because I didn't want to seem like I was unemployed. My real job is in software sales and technology. Oddly enough, it's a very striking parallel to the crypto space. What we do at Watchman is we take non-traditional payment technologies and payment types, and we make them acceptable to traditional vendors. So a very simple example of that would be we have about 150 universities and institutions across the country, and our software enables a student on, say, the first day of class in college to walk into the campus store and say, I'd like to buy my textbooks with my financial aid. And so since that's not an easy thing to just go and spend at a retail counter, you can't walk into Walmart and say, can I use my student financial aid? Our system is just a middleware that will look up the aid, make sure it's eligible, and present it to any approved merchant over a traditional credit card. So if you think about that in the context of cryptocurrency, there's Shift. There's a lot of companies in this space that do exactly what we do. And I'm not here to talk about that, but if you look up Watchman and you think, well, those guys don't mine anything, we don't. I just wanted to have a title that made sense. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about the title, everything you need to know about mining. If you walk away slightly disappointed that you didn't get exactly everything you need to know about mining, that's sort of the venue's fault, because they called me and said, what's the title of your presentation? And I said, mining. And they said, well, that sounds a little bit boring. And I said, okay, well, how about everything you need to know about mining? And that's how we got to this title. So without further ado, I'll jump into this. I consider myself an enterprise hobbyist. I started mining about 3 years ago. I bought my first 2 miners actually in this town on my way to the airport. I found them on Craigslist. I showed up at some guy's house. He showed me how they worked. And about a week later, I was hooked. I just needed to do more. How could I do this at scale? So first off, what is mining? I won't go too far into this because I suspect the audience in this room has either already heard it 3 times at the show or you came pretty well equipped knowing what mining is and how it works. But if you think about it like a big math problem, or the way I explained it to some of my nieces and nephews is it's like basically braiding your hair. You've got to account for every loop in that braid when you talk about the next loop moving forward, right? So it's just a very simple process, if you understand calculus, that enables folks to take a proof of work and move forward through that process to confirm network transactions. So every transaction that you perform on the blockchain, specifically in Bitcoin, is mined to get into that transaction. And then once it's done, the miners, the folks on the receiving end, they get a reward for completing it. So what's proof of work, right? That's something I just mentioned in the previous slide. Well, proof of work is kind of required in this space because it's a trustless concept, right? So we have this distributed ledger that everybody has to agree is accurate. And basically, miners participate in this game. It's really a probabilistic lottery to equate the next block in the blockchain. And when we get there and when we solve for X, we get rewarded. And on the other side, as users of the network or other miners or other players who are hosting nodes, they have to be able to go back and say, are all of the transactions in that block accurate? And that's where the proof of work comes in. If you think about it again, simple mathematics, if I told you 1 + 1 is 6, you'd say he's a liar. So in the proof of work space, you have a little bit of an equation, and in order for that equation to equal the expected answer and everyone to agree on it, that's the simplistic way of explaining proof of work. And anyone who has questions about these sort of tangential or fundamentals after, I'm happy to talk about that. So how hard is it to mine, right? What does it mean to be a miner? And if anybody noticed, we had McAfee here yesterday. He was talking about how he just quit because it's incredibly boring. So I'd say that's the hardest part, is once you get everything up and running, it's not particularly rewarding except for the money, which everybody likes money. But if you're just standing there looking at all your machines, you can get kind of bored by them. Aside from the fact if you've ever employed more than 10 or 20 people, that can also be really annoying. So they don't complain, which is kind of nice. But basically, all coins, all altcoins, Bitcoin, and the lot have difficulties. And a lot of people, when they read online, "Oh, I'm never going to mine," is what they say, because they read that it's only going to get harder and it's just not going to make money for me. But the reality with Bitcoin in particular is, as we've noticed, especially in the past couple of weeks, the price goes up and down at dramatic rates. And because the price goes up and down, so too does difficulty. So if you think about difficulty, we all know, or if you didn't know, now you do, that every 10 minutes, theoretically, there should be a new block on the Bitcoin blockchain. And if that timeline changes because a lot of miners suddenly start mining and they're doing it faster, well, every 2 weeks there's an adjustment to make sure that the difficulty gets a little harder, because we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, right? We've been told there's only going to be 21 million of them, and it's going to be done, sometime in between 2020 and 2040. That last block will be mined. So if that's the case, then if it gets going too fast, they slow it down, or it slows itself down. If it gets going too slow, it gets sped up. So that difficulty does change to your benefit or your disadvantage as a miner. And basically, as it gets easier or harder, you can make more or less money. So on the average, it does tend to trend up. There's always going to be more people trying to get after those rewards, but it's something to think about. If you look at it right now today, you might think, "Oh, it doesn't make sense, I'll never do it." If you're thinking about getting into mining, my suggestion would be look at it for a couple weeks or months, and you might be pleasantly surprised that it gets better and worse from day to day. So when you think about what does it take to be a miner, and I didn't put this in the deck, but what I would say is that mining isn't for everyone. Apparently it's not for McAfee, right? He wants to do more exciting things with his life. You don't blame him. But I do think everyone should do it. And the reason for that is because if you've learned at all about how, different blockchains, different tokens, different coins are coming along, decentralization is core to this whole organization, this whole group, everyone that's in this room surviving. And if we all trust that one guy in China is going to do it all for us, we might be making a really big mistake. So if everyone had their own miner, even if you didn't do it to make all the money in the world, that would afford us some more decentralization. So it's something to think about just from that perspective. But when you think about the prerequisites as to the real tangibles, the things that are going to be required so you don't buy a bunch of equipment and then realize you can't use it, number one is, am I going to do this as a hobby or business? You got to think about electricity. That was something I was pretty short-sighted on. It was a pitfall that caught me off guard. You need to think about managing the miners, because if you have a real job, like I mentioned I do before, you can't just tell your boss, "I need to take a day off because I have to air dust all my miners," right? You actually have to plan that into your schedule. You have to think about how you want to mine. I'll be specifically talking about ASICs and GPU rigs. Everything I've seen in the cloud space is not worth it. It's just too expensive and reeks of scams. It just doesn't look like a real thing to me. Now, that's not to say that there aren't real opportunities. I'm sure there are. I just haven't liked what I've seen. And then, do you want to solo mine? Do you want to pool mine, multi-mine, or just go for one specific coin? So hobby or business. So you basically need to plan this expense. And what I did is I just started a pass-through entity, a little LLC for myself. And I'd suggest even if you're going to have two miners, you do that, because taxes will get you. And there's a lot of things about the money you're going to spend and the money you're going to make that sort of makes sense, especially with some of the new tax legislation, to have a pass-through entity and not necessarily just do it on your own. If you already own another company, maybe you can work that into your depreciation schedules or however else you do it. But think about that, because as you start making money, and first you have to explain to your spouse why you have such a high electricity bill, and then you have to explain where all that money came from that you bought them nice things with. The taxes will catch up with you. So just a good sort of prerequisite to think about. Consider how much time it's going to take to maintain your equipment. Do you want to do it in your basement? Well, if you're going to use ASICs, probably not, unless, like me, you live in Colorado and half the year you can heat your house with it. They're loud. Just imagine if you're going to have a dozen ASIC miners, go to Home Depot and buy just one shop vac, put it on in your basement for a couple hours, and then imagine a dozen of them going at the same time. It's pretty loud. And then, like I always tell my friends who say, I'm going to get a bunch of these. I'm going to be just like you. Happy wife, happy life. So I got my miners out of my house as quick as I could because she was not pleased. And I've got some pictures of what I started with later on in the presentation. So I had this really fortunate position that I grew up nephew of a bunch of electricians, so I know a lot about how to wire electricity. So I jumped right in and said, I don't need an electrician. I'm going to do this myself. I ran 100 amps of the power off my house out to our guest house, which is really just a shed, but it's finished and looks quite nice. And 2 months later, I was explaining to the utility company how I didn't understand why the wires just disappeared in the wall. I didn't know how that happened and why it smelled like burning. So hire an electrician, have them come to your place, whether it's your house or your place of work, and make sure you do it all right, because I could have burnt down my whole house. And maybe we would have done well on the insurance, but it would have been a bummer. So think about that as you go through. And plan for more power than you need, because I started with 4 miners. I thought I'd ever have 8 in my existence as a miner, and I'm cresting 100 now. So think about how many you want, and just double your capacity, because you might get hooked early and often. And yeah, if you have solar on your house, if you already bought one of those fancy Tesla roofs, you should mine because you've got extra capacity. Go ahead and use it. So software. This is something that I also fell into a little bit of a trap on, in that there's a bunch of really cool software out there. Awesome Miner is cool. Genesis Hive's cool. I use Awesome Miner for what I call my boneyard. It's where all my equipment goes before it goes up on eBay. So I have a place that's readily accessible to me that's not in a data center, that I can pull equipment out. While it's listed, I can keep running it, and I can benchmark it, make sure it's still working if I'm going to sell it, because you don't want to sell someone something that doesn't work. Although people are out there doing that, it's not a good idea, not a good hobby. So Awesome Miner is what I use in that space. And if you have some technical experience, you might want to develop your own. I think there's a lot of room to grow here. That's what we did ultimately among my partners, is we made our own software. We don't make it readily available to others, because as you'll find when you talk to more and more miners, you always have your hook, your thing that you do that makes you a little bit better. So one of our hooks, one of the things that we really chased in our striving to be better miners, was avoiding or eliminating latency as best we could, because since it's a probabilistic game and you want to get to the block first, you want to have every possible direction that you could travel around the world to get to your nearest node. So multiple internet connections, all fiber, and you want to get there before the next guy. Most people focus on power, which is also really important, but our focus has been on latency, with power as our secondary requirement in our facilities. On the other side, there are some GPU management apps that I've also tinkered with. I built a GPU rig at the same time that I bought my first 2 ASICs, and I quit GPU mining just around the same time. Not because it doesn't make sense technically, but because it didn't make sense cost-wise. There is so much cost in buying graphics processing units or just video cards on the market, and everybody and their mother who could build a computer and is interested in this is doing that. So I learned pretty quickly that I could buy GPUs for less and make more money with them. Now, that does take away some of the scope of coins that you can mine readily, but if you diversify across your GPUs, that's how I solve for the problem. When you choose your hardware, like I mentioned, build or buy ASICs, and what type of ASICs do you want to go for? So if you've heard ASICs, and I just said it probably 10 times in the past 2 minutes, it stands for an application-specific integrated circuit. Basically, it's a device that only does one thing. When you power it on, it's just hungry to do that thing. It's what Henry Ford wanted when he made the assembly line, right? So if anyone ever had a dishwasher from like 1960, 1969, those things never stopped working because they didn't have software. They just had ASICs in them. And if you think about that, the old school equipment that we had, you never had to figure out on YouTube how to reboot it, right? Because it only did one thing and it did it well. That's effectively what these things do, which is kind of funny because we're taking an old methodology, old technology, and bringing it back. That's a lot of the space shuttle had ASICs on it. So once you choose your hardware, and I mentioned this before, you've got a couple choices among the providers. I started mining Bitcoin, which the algorithm's SHA-256. I jumped into Litecoin once there was readily available Litecoin miners. Bought a bunch of Dash miners. If you've done some research on this, a lot of people hate one of the companies out there called Bitmain. They're sort of like McAfee. Like half the people love them, half the people hate them. Dash miners got a lot of bad rap, and I still mine all 15 of my X11 miners, and they make about $8 or $10 a day. So there was a time when I first had them where they cost me $3 a day to run, but since I was running them in parallel next to other equipment, the cost was sort of neutralized, and when everyone else was griping about it and didn't have their machines on, I was getting a bunch of Dash. And then as soon as the price came back up, it panned out. So don't fall victim to everyone else griping and say, well, I'm going to unplug mine too, because it doesn't make sense. If you can afford to, through your diversification, let's say you get home and you decide you want to do this, you buy one of each of these, and there's one that apparently didn't make the PDF, but there's Siacoin as well. That's the newest ASIC that Bitmain made, and there's only one coin in that algorithm, which is kind of weird. So if it goes away, everyone who has that equipment is going to be really pissed. But for now, today, it's the most profitable miner that Bitmain makes. Get about $50 a day. When I got mine delivered, got about $800 a day. So they were making a lot of money on day 1, day 2, day 3. But once everybody plugged them in, just shot down. So you're competing, right? That's the name of the game. But when you choose your hardware, my suggestion is, just because we all probably have Bitcoin and really love Bitcoin and want more of it, don't necessarily chase the one coin. Try to keep your options diverse. Bitmain, like I said, they're known for being really controversial, but they also make the most algorithms across their very different ASICs. So you can't buy one machine in the ASIC land that does all those things. When you buy a SHA-256 miner, it mines Bitcoin and probably about 20 other coins, but it's only going to do that. You can't go get what they call an Antminer S9 and expect to turn around and mine Litecoin. It just doesn't work that way. Canaan's another big one. They're known for being really reliable, and a bunch of folks ignore them because their miners right now, comparably, the S9, which is the kind of top class Bitmain miner, does 13.5 to 14 terahash per second. The Canaan top line, which is what they call the Avalon 741, does 11. So people think, oh, it must not be as good. Well, what I'll tell you is I use them both, and the Canaans last a lot longer. So if you expect to run your miners for a couple years as opposed to 6 to 9 months and sell them, think about buying a slightly slower one, because it's not going to burn out as fast. You know, they say bright stars die young. Same concept. If you run a machine and you're running it hard, you can expect that it's going to run out of gas a little bit quicker. And like I mentioned before, diversification's key in overcoming the market changes. There was a time when my SHA-256 miners were making me $40 a day constantly, each one. Now they're making about 9. So the Litecoin miners are picking up the slack. Yesterday I checked at $35 per miner per day. So it's always going to just change, and if you diversify, you'll be happier for it. This is Bitmain's site. One of the things that I've done with them and with Canaan, and I'll get to the other places you can buy them, is there's some cool apps you can get online. They're very user-friendly. The one I use is called Watchit, and it's just an online service where you can go in, you put in a URL of a shopping cart, and if a change happens on that page, they notify you via text, via email, however you want to be made notified. So that way, when these things go up for sale, you know instantly, because typically when they launch a new piece of equipment, it's sold out in 8 minutes. So you know, now you also have to think you're buying in China, so it's not going to be at an opportune time for you to just be like, oh, it's 9 a.m., I'm going to go check out Bitmain. They're gone. So if you get the messages, you'll know that it's coming, and what you'll find is most of these websites, they start changing them about 24 hours before they launch the product. They don't put it up there, but other stuff starts to disappear, things start to change. That's an indicator that something's coming. And that's one of the tricks that I've used. If you're going to buy one-off, to get them. Right now, when it comes to Bitmain and also Canaan, Blockforge.com, I know those guys. I lived in Phoenix for a while. They're a reputable company. When it comes to buying these, you can buy them one-off. If you start buying at scale by pallets, 60, 100 miners at a time, then you'll want to go directly to Bitmain. You'll want to go directly to Canaan, and you'll get a little bit of a better price. The downside is you're typically buying them on spot pricing before they even manufacture them. And there's talk in the market that maybe they use them before they sell them to you. I actually don't think that most of the miners or most of the manufacturers do that anymore. But I do think if they build a miner for you, they make two at once. They spin one up because they can afford to. And then they take that one offline or sell it to someone else used when they send you your new one. So another good indicator that new equipment's on the market is if you watch the global hash rate and you suddenly see one of those absolute spikes in hash rate, somebody just either turned on their mining rigs or new equipment just entered the market. So get out there looking for it and see who's selling it. Not everybody who builds this stuff sells it, so another thing to keep in mind. How long do they last? Everybody reports different things. I've heard people say, my miners didn't last for more than 2 weeks, but they're also in Georgia and they were running them on their back porch. So, you've got to be in a position where your equipment stays dry, it stays cool, and think about it like you're in a data center. You don't necessarily want to just shove this thing in your garage right behind your table saw because you're going to get all that sawdust in there and rot the thing out. I've had luck between 9 and 12 months. What I have found as well, just industry tip, is don't keep them until they stop working, right? Get a miner, mine it for 9 to 12 months. You'll have a 6-month warranty on it while you've got it, and then turn around and sell it on the secondhand market. In the past 2 years, if you've been doing that, you'll get more money for it than you paid, which is kind of nice to buy a miner for $1,400, mine on it for 9 months, and then get $4,000 when you sell it on eBay. Now, that's not a forever thing. It's actually sort of come down in the past couple of months, but the idea being that you don't want to have the capital expense of suddenly replacing all of your mining equipment the day that it quits working or the day that it's irrelevant because they just release the next one that's 10 times more powerful than the one you have. Anyone who bought a grid seed or an S2 or an S7 understands that. If you think you still want to run that in your basement, you're mistaken because you'll just burn a lot of electricity and you'll never find much reward. So, like I said, most of the equipment comes with a 6-month warranty. You at least want to use it during that time because it's basically guaranteed to keep working. The downside to the warranties is when you ship them in to get them repaired, they might swap it out and send you one in a week, and they might send you one in 3 months. So you don't always get that equipment running for you when it's out of commission. But it is nice to know that they follow through. I've never had a warranty problem where it wasn't taken care of. They do, however, they don't send you a brand new one. They send you another one that they fixed. So how much will I make? It's impossible to say how much you'll make. I don't want to get up here and tell everybody you're going to be millionaires tomorrow because you probably won't be. But you can make some educated guesses. Whattomine.com and coinwars.com are good sites for that, and you can tell a lot about how the mining world works from those pages. I apologize if you didn't all get photos of that. These are the coins I'm chasing today. You can see the different algorithms on the far right, and this is actually just a screenshot that I took this morning of what I called my boneyard before. These are all the machines that are sort of destined to be sold in the next couple weeks. You can see the price of Bitcoin. You can see 512 at 68. That's on the average what those 30 miners are pushing. It says 31. One of them is just it's the controller computer that's running this software, and it's got one GPU in it. So I don't really count that one, but it's out there mining, and you can see the monthly return. Now, when you look at these software calculations, those returns aren't accurate. That's just right now the second what you'd get. So you could always just sort of discount that 20% or wait till the end of the month and see how you did. Don't go taking that number to the bank. If you go buy an engagement ring with that, you'll be really pissed. But if you look at the lists on the far end, you'll see Bitcoin's at the bottom, Litecoin's at the bottom. They're in order of profitability right now. So Universal is the most, or Unit is the most profitable coin. Now, I would argue most of those coins that are on that list are what I'd call shit coins. They don't make sense to invest in long term. But if you can mine them now and flip them to the banner coin, like Litecoin or Bitcoin, it makes sense to do it. So don't get yourself stuck in a place where you have a bunch of a coin that's going away or that doesn't matter. but certainly mine it and convert it as you can. This is my mining timeline right here. These are the first 2 miners I ever bought. You can see I printed a little shroud there to push air out. I put it in a different rig. This is the first GPU rig I ever built. That was about 2.5 years ago. When I scaled up, I went to a guy who tried to build a grow facility in Colorado and then found out he was too close to a high school. So he had all this power and a warehouse and he couldn't have marijuana. So I put my miners in his warehouse. It's a 22,000 square foot warehouse. That's where the Boneyard lives right now. And we heat that whole thing. If it's 11 degrees outside, it's 75 degrees inside with just all 30 of those miners. So there's a lot of cubic volume, cubic air in that space, and we keep it nice and warm for them. We also keep it nice and loud for them. So it's just a constant dull roar. Since then, I've scaled up. I found some partners. And what we're doing now today is we're building mining operations underground in southern Utah. So we found some old caves on a developer's property. We're putting in recycled Havoc shelters, so Kim Jong-un banks that you might find yourself in after the nukes come. And we're building mining rigs that look a little more professional. We laser cut or plasma cut our own shrouds for the front of these miners. So each one of these is an ant miner, and they're in a nice little baffle that we've created. We don't powder coat them all, but we did the first one because we were really proud of it. And those guys run underground in a 50-degree cave 24/7. Long-term goal is we'd like to have about 3,000 to 5,000 miners running, individual miners, and power them as best we can with surface solar. So I'll have a whole solar array and be pumping that juice into the ground. The challenge we're having right here, right now, is when we had the city inspector come to look at our rigs, and I've got to be done. But when we had the city inspector come, he was like, "What the hell are you putting all this power into the ground for? Like, what's going on here?" So power's the thing that can make or break you. Keep that in mind. So I'm happy to chat with anyone outside. I don't want to take the next speaker's time, but thank you very much for coming to hear me speak, and hopefully this was helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Our next speaker will be on in about 10 minutes. So if you need to take a break, grab some coffee. We'll see you back in a few.